Of course, what I mean by I bought an antique spinning wheel is I bought an antique spinning wheel 2 years ago with the intent of learning how to spin my own thread to be able to use in my sewing, and of course have been too afraid to actually learn how to do the actual spinning, but not anymore, for today is the day that I actually learn properly how to use this thing. So I have the idea to start with flax, because when you use linen thread, as was very common to use historically for stitching, it is spun with flax rather than the more common wools that are often spun into yarns that are used for knitting. Every person that I have spoken to that does the spinning thing has subsequently given me a sort of incredulous look, like, why? Because apparently learning how to spin with flax, or even just spinning with flax in general, is like the equivalent of starting how to sew with silk charmeuse. Like, do you have a death wish? Am I going to spend the time learning the spinning technique on some easier fiber such as wool? Absolutely not. Where is the fun in that? I will thus convey to you, I hope, the challenges that go into spinning, or the joys that go into spinning, hopefully both. I have here a spinning wheel that I have purchased via the eBay from a very old lady. We don't know precisely how old this is, but possibly 19th century, I would guess. The other thing that needs to happen is we need a distaff, which is basically a pole, or in my case, if your wheel does not have a connected distaff pole, you use your broomstick. Which mode commence? The objective of the distaff is to provide you with a nice, organized source of fibers, so you're ideally not battling against a tangled mess when you're pulling fresh fibers into your work. I have here some flax. This is a slightly coarser weight since I thought this might be easier to start with. Or if not easier, at least a lesser quality that I wouldn't feel so bad turning into something potentially very ugly. I'm separating out the fibers from their original bundles and layering them into a large mat, trying to align the strands so that they're all running in the same vertical direction. This mat of flax is then rolled up onto my broomstick and tied into place with some ribbon. As many of you crafty and creative folk know, handcrafts can be extremely meditative when you've attuned your body to know how to do them, and extremely stressful whilst you are still learning. That is why I am very excited to be working with Headspace for this video, the mindfulness and meditation app that not only has my own therapist very enthusiastically recommended to me, but that the NHS recommends for its own staff. I'm hoping that a bit of regular mindfulness will help me to stay calm and encourage me to take on the challenges of learning this new skill.
Tonight's exercise is a really simple breathing exercise. In for 4, 2, 3, 4. You're nice and relaxed.
In addition to traditional meditation, Headspace also offers expert guidance sessions on topics like creativity, burnout, finances, and student life, as well as sleepcasts, podcasts, calming music streams, and video-accompanied meditations, so there really is something for all sorts of brains. I personally love the Soundscape library because, and I am of the expert opinion, that putting birdsong in the background of any given task instantly solves every conceivable problem known to humankind. Headspace is helping its users build lasting healthy habits, reduce stress, and find focus. Head to the link in the description if you fancy exploring the app for yourself with a cheeky little free trial. First things first, now that we have our distaff set up and we have a spinning wheel, we need to get this threaded up. These are really very simple machines to use, or at the very least, seem to make a lot of intuitive sense to one who is already mildly accustomed to some sewing machine usage. The bobbin just sits on the flyer like so, and you'll notice that the bobbin has a little crevasse on the end. It's slightly smaller than the wheel that screws onto the end, which means that once I've hooked the drive bands up, one on each, the wheel and the flyer are going to spin at slightly different speeds. This is what's going to help to add a nice tight twist to the fiber and to strengthen it for use, whilst also winding it smoothly onto the bobbin. There are, of course, many different types of wheel and methods for spinning, but this particular type is what is called a double drive wheel. That is because it has a drive band which doubles up in a figure of 8 around the wheel. I hear was used more particularly for flax spinning. So when I'm teaching people how to use a treadle sewing machine, the first thing that I always tell people to do before they actually start sewing is to just treadle for a bit and get a sense of the rhythm and how the machine works. Because there is a very sort of physical interaction between you as the operator and the machine itself. It takes a bit of practice and it takes a bit of learning that language. So I'm gonna just give this a go and make sure that I understand how it's working so that hopefully, ideally, when I get to the actual spinning, I won't have to think about the operating of the machine, but this will just be completely second nature. It is a bit faster than the treadles that I'm used to working with in sewing. So this is a little bit of an adjustment. Because I'm having to operate it quicker, it's more tiring on the ankle. I mean, is this just a matter of developing one very strong treadling ankle? It's also working if I'm just pushing it once and then just letting it glide for the second one. It's not going as fast then. There is a tension adjustment on this. There's a little knob back here that you can pull to either move this front end further or back. Tightening the tension makes it more difficult to operate. So I wonder if loosening the tension will actually require less manpower. That is a bit easier, and it is moving a bit more slowly. This is very relaxing. I imagine if the spinning isn't too much of an ordeal, then the process of this would actually be super calming. I could very much imagine doing this while like watching Netflix or something. It's such a simple little contraption, and yet it works so efficiently. I love the sounds that it makes. I mean, I imagine this is what people would be listening to. I mean, for hundreds of years throughout history, like this is the same sound. We don't have recordings of most of the sounds in history. A lot of sounds are just lost. Languages, accents, dialects are just lost to time, but little sounds like this, the little languages and communications of machinery that exists from these time periods, this survives, and these are the sounds, these are the languages that would have been spoken. And it's so cool to be able to hear them. Okay, no more procrastination. We actually have to start spinning some real flax, because otherwise, what is this all for? One thing that I'd come across in my pre-spinning research was that spinning flax is much easier done with wet fingers, since the moisture releases the pectins in the plant fibers and helps them to bind together a little bit better. Oh no. What I didn't realize is that flax as a fiber itself is pretty weak on its own, and that before it's been moistened and twisted, it's pretty difficult to get it to do pretty much anything. Oh no, okay. I want to know how you start this so that it's thick enough to hold, because it keeps just wanting to shred because it's not spun yet. Look at this absolute disgrace. So Heathcliff knows a thing or two about spinning.
At least one thing.
One whole thing.
You need what's called a leader thread to just wrap around the first bit to get yourself going.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh, so you made a loop. Okay.
Yeah, it's just a loop. Oh my god. This is my first time holding string, can you tell? Anyway, you will wrap your flax around this.
Oh,
and then
nice.
Your first bit might be a bit chonky, but once you start getting twist into it,
yeah,
this will hold.
Then you cut that off.
Yeah. Wool fibre is so much easier to spin than flax.
Yeah, I know, I hear. The process of this would actually be super calming. I could very much imagine doing this while like watching Netflix or something. It was going well. No, it really wasn't.
The distaff is supposed to sort of go by your side.
Maybe if I put it back here.
Like here,
yeah.
like in the neck of yours, so you're holding it.
Oh, this is so much better. Okay. The one thing that I am not managing to figure out currently is how you spin it fine enough without it snapping. Oh, no. I have broken it. So I've been doing this for about 15 minutes. And I've managed to go from the ugliest twine you will ever lay thine eyes upon to very thick and slightly ugly thread. So that's hope, that's progress.
You have to make sure that the twist doesn't travel up into fibre that you haven't spun yet. You have to be drafting out with your left hand and holding the twist with your right until you're ready to let it go. And for the twist.
Heathcliff's advice was really very useful, and especially that they've only ever used a drop spindle before. So whilst I took a moment to process this new information, I wanted to see for myself whether spinning on a wheel is actually a challenging thing to get used to, even for an experienced spinner.
No.
Okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one finding this difficult and stressful.
This would be why the twist isn't going up. Okay, let's regather ourselves.
Vindication.
It's weird because it keeps going in as well.
Yeah.
This is actually hard.
Okay, I feel justified now. Wow, this makes it so much easier. Okay, it's not the worst. Oh no. I've spun my skirt into that. So I think I've got the technique down a bit better. I have not quite got the tension right. This is certainly a choice. Day 1 of learning how to spin, as you can see. We started off quite rough, traveling forward. We start to get slightly slimmer, but my tension goes off the rails here. We continue proceeding with many a breakage and many a attempting to put things back together. Here is where I started doing the trick where you pull the flax out before you feed it through with one hand and make sure the twist doesn't go up into the fibers. And then here we actually start to get quite a decent little bit of spinning here. Getting a bit slimmer. It's still not the neatest thing in the world, but the tension is better until we get to around here where something broke and it kind of went downhill from here. But, you know, if we look at it beginning to end, you know, there's a bit of improvement. Still wouldn't say you could use this to sew a garment though. This is what we're actually going for. So I had a thought, and that is the exact same advice that we give to anyone who is learning how to sew, and that is don't set yourself up for failure by giving yourself horrible materials to start working with because it's practice and you might as well waste it. I think I'm really just shooting myself in the foot with this and using a very coarse, very thick flax fiber. So I do have a nice finer weight of flax. This is much fluffier and I feel like will actually be easier to work with and will definitely produce a much finer, neater thread. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the finer flax options and see if this makes a difference in the quality of thread or twine that we are able to produce. Okay, day 2, we are starting with this new, better quality flax, nicer, softer quality flax. Hopefully we have some better luck today. Apparently I was doing this on the wrong side last time. You're supposed to go from this way so that this crosses over. Okay. The spinning is definitely a lot neater this time, and I'm finding it definitely a lot easier to do and to manage. It is wanting to behave a lot more. This flax is much wispier, so it's wanting to stick to itself much better than the grassier flax was wanting to. I was vaguely managing to get the hand of this, and while I felt like I was getting the thread as thin as I could without it detaching, it was still nowhere near as thin as it would have to be to sew with, even as a heavyweight thread. Sewing threads are plied for strength, 3-ply for most modern threads, but historically most threads were only 2-ply, which still means that each individual strand needs to be half the total thickness of my final thread, and the thickness of this single-ply thread was already a heavyweight thread in and of itself. And so, Seeking some tips, or maybe just some encouragement, I decided to call in some help. Jilian Eve, hello! So you are like the YouTube spinning guru, I feel like. Just what have I got myself into?
So when we're talking about linen thread, we want it to be as smooth and as even as possible, because any little bits that are sticking up, that are constantly being pulled through fabric, it's abrading not just the thread itself, but also the warp and weft of that fabric each time it goes through, right? So we need it thin, smooth, and plied.
You know, I can only get it so thin before it just sort of wisps off into nothingness.
Essentially, what you want to have perfect consistency, you're going to have the same number of fibers at each point, right? If you have 5 fibers that are making up that thread at any given point, you want to have enough overlap so that when one runs out, you've got another one to take its place. So if you're ending them, and there's not enough of a space there to give it the twist that it needs to have the friction to hold together, you're going to end up with a lot of, kind of just falling apart, or sometimes it'll just slide apart because it hasn't gained the twist it needs. Twist is like glue. The other thing that can happen too, when we get too much twist, the fibers can become brittle and they can snap.
Yeah, I've definitely done that.
Okay, so it's kind of a matter of finding that balance, and that is sort of the active work that the spinner is doing as they spin to get the end yarn product. When I spin, I've got one hand that's kind of managing the tension between the yarn that's being spun where the twist is entering, and then I've got another hand that's kind of doing the drafting. And so the hand that is closer to the wheel would be the hand that you're putting, whatever moisture on to smooth it down. And that tension between that hand and the wheel helps the twist to distribute evenly.
I'm so nervous now. Oh no.
But look at the end there where it came apart. That's a point where you would want to get it more overlapped. If you want to start up close to the orifice and then start spinning and just slowly start sliding your hand back. So you're keeping that twist between you and the wheel. And so once it's built up enough, you're going to let it come back into the yarn that's forming. So it doesn't build up so much to get brittle, but you're guiding it into your fibers so that it isn't, going too fast to slide apart.
Right. Give this a go.
That's looking good. I would say you could probably get a little faster. Move your hand back a little faster. Yep.
Okay.
How's that looking?
Okay.
And then there's a whole other factor that comes into it. Have you been spinning wet or dry?
Dry. I do have a little pot of water here.
So the flax, of course, coming from a plant, it has pectins in it. People probably previously used saliva, which is interesting because the enzymes in our saliva break down the pectins, and it makes it like glue. A lot of people don't like to use saliva. I understand. So another thing that historically people would do is they would take flax seed, which of course if you're working with linen flax, you probably have flax seed, and put it in some boiling water and let it sit and steep. And it creates kind of a gelatinous glue. It's a little slimy.
That's better to use than just like plain tap water?
It'll get you through, but if you really want the highest quality of linen that you'll be able to eventually sew with, I would recommend trying some of the flax glue and see what you think.
Before I forget, but where does the thing come from, pricking your finger on a spinning wheel? Because there is no needle on this.
First of all, Disney created a spinning wheel shaped object. It's some sort of abomination. In the movie, of course, that, we're probably all familiar with, they used a tip at the top of the distaff, which isn't a thing. Why would you have a spike sticking out where people could, run into that. It doesn't need to be there. No one's going to put it there. From the oldest version of the fairy tale, it was actually a sliver of the outer vegetable matter that is supposed to be removed from the processing of the flax. If you slide up into that, you get a sliver under your fingernail, and that was what originally in the first iteration of the fairy tale put her to sleep. But yeah, it was the flax itself that got her in the original.
And I allow my mind to rest and stop thinking about the to-do list or the things I have to get to, and instead ask my mind to come into a dream space, a place where my imagination can open up and go a bit wild and really bring a lot of lightness and joy.
Learning how to spin, learning how to use a sewing machine, learning how to sew, learning how to do any handcraft really. As I've been doing this, I've been thinking it's very similar to having a pet. When you've had guinea pigs your whole life, like I have, you start to learn their body language. Like, I know instinctually what each individual little squeak means for my pigs. I know when my pigs are upset, I know when they're hot, I know when they're hungry, I know when they're laughing, I know when they're teasing. I know the little butt dance that they do when I'm holding them and they're about to pee on me, so I have to run them back to their cage. You learn all these little tiny manners of like subtle physical communication between you and your pet, whether it's cats or dogs or birds or rodents or whatever. As I'm doing the spinning, I'm realizing that the fibers have different temperaments almost, or the relationship between the fiber and the wheel has a very specific temperament. It's a matter of learning with your hands and being able to feel when the fiber is having enough twist in it and it's time to sort of let it go, versus when there's not enough twist in it and you have to sort of keep hold on it. You can't force it. Like many aspects of manual machinery, you have to sort of respond to what the fiber wants to do, what the garment is wanting to do if you're using a sewing machine. You have to learn how to respond to the machine to keep it going. So it's been a really interesting and difficult process to learn what this physical language of the fiber is turning out to be. But I feel like I finally am starting to get a handle on what this language is. So it's been about 10 days of spinning experiments, and here is where we are so far. And I mean, the process is still ongoing, so don't get me wrong, but like I feel like I only recently just finally got a relatively decent understanding of how to do this. Like, it's not perfect yet. This is still like the last, I want to say, like maybe, I don't know, 6 feet of this are nice like this. I'm fairly satisfied with where we have got to so far. How it started, how it's going. So it's definitely going a lot better than it was about 10 days ago, but you know, as with any skill, there's always room for improvement, and improvement will continue to be made. This, I also will remind, is single ply. So the next step in the process is to ply this into a double ply so that it is stronger and we can use it for thread. That's thread. That is some thick thread, but that is some thread. So I have some thread. This is more slightly heavyweight linen thread. So the thread that I've got here is quite chonky. Linen thread is quite fluffy. When you pull it through fabric, it wants to sort of catch on the fabric and weaken a bit. This is why we wax linen thread when we use it. Unspool a little bit. Wow, it's thread! And now the question that I have is, will this fit into a needle? Yeah, this'll go. Okay, okay. Now, let's do some sewing. I am stitching through a very tightly woven cotton, which is proving to be a challenge for this because this is some chonky thread trying to go through this tiny little weave. But that is definitely a stitch. It's actually getting a bit easier to work with as I go because I guess the fibers are sort of settling into place. Everything's been waxed, and now I guess pulling it through the fabric is just causing the wax to coat it a bit more evenly. This is actually, like, quite functional. Like, I could genuinely make something from this, probably. And I might actually. No, seriously, this is so cool. Okay. Yeah, I am quite satisfied with this. This is not the worst thing in the world, especially for first time trying a new thing. Let's see how strong this is. Oh, that is strong. That's some good thread. Holding up very nicely. This garment is not about to get ripped apart. Wow, well that's very encouraging. I am really genuinely so surprised at how this thread turned out. One thing that absolutely did not surprise me whatsoever is the absolute thrill in getting to use a piece of machinery and getting to practice a skill that has been around for hundreds, I mean thousands of years. And one thing that I found very interesting is, of course, historically, someone in your community or in your family would have taught you these skills. And while many of us these days might not have someone in our family who can teach us how to sew or who can teach us how to spin, we have a different form of community. We have our online communities, and even though these might be extremely niche crafts nowadays, there are still entire communities of people who spin, and entire communities of people who sew, and who weave, and who do any manner of craft. I can call up incredible spinners like Evie who have been studying these crafts, or a fabulous assistant who just happens to have this incredible knowledge of spinning who can help me along on my journey. I mean, that is the same fundamental principle of being taught by your community that has been around once again for basically the majority of human history. There is just so much that is just so cool about connecting with the past. Am I making this shot setup much more complicated than it needs to be to avoid actually spinning? Maybe.
Over the landscape in some celebration for spring.
Oh my god, you're so cute. But stop it.
Beams through the
This is the first thread. Oh my god. No, this is not gonna happen. Oh, it happened. But that is a hole.